commander out here at the Marine Detachment at Fort Lee. In this audience, you have instructors for 11 different MOS producing schools and some students in the back. But with that, General, I'll turn it over to you for opening comments.
But really what I wanted to do is prime the pump a little bit here, just so we can get into the Q&A. We live in some stern times. They're not challenging times for Marines. We can handle anything that's thrown at us. But it's a time when I think that the gap between someone who used to serve and someone who's serving today can still be pretty severe because of everything that's going on economically, politically, public health-wise, the reason you're all sitting far apart from each other. And I really want to get into your question. So let me talk for a couple moments. The only goal here is to close the gap between you and I and hopefully give you some nuggets that may be of value as you move forward in your careers, and certainly the thumbprint that you're putting on the young folks who are heading out to the fleet as their next stop. I think that right now, at a time when so much is in flux, technology's changing, politics have taken some unusual turns, democracies go through these periods, nothing to be overly concerned about. But as all of the things that we see changing around us almost wash over our surroundings, I've noticed in some cases, I was talking to the Brigade of Midshipmen at Annapolis 2 nights ago, there's questions about what do you hold on to? What is enduring? And, you know, I read a lot of history, and the reason is very simple. I didn't read a lot of history until I was in the Marines, and then, as you know, the Commandant's reading list is full of history. I didn't understand why, really, until I'd been in for a couple decades. Then I realized that the Marine Corps in places like Fort Lee and Parris Island, San Diego, and of course in the fleet itself, the Marine Corps trains you very well for our grim job. I mean, it's always a little exciting when you first get shot at, but really the Marine Corps trains you well for it. What they can't train you well for is what they don't know you're going to run into. And that's where the Commandant's reading list, that's where history comes to bear. And as I look back over what I learned from history, as they trained me for what they knew I'd confront, but educated me for what they couldn't know I'd run into, and educated me very well, I might add, for jobs that I never, frankly, I never anticipated or even desired in some cases. I recognized that history helps you to ask the right questions. And here's something I think that comes home, and that is we're living in a time when you should doubt your doubts. Don't doubt your values. Don't doubt your Marine Corps values. And somehow the steadiness of you men and women who are putting your thumbprint on the young privates, PFCs who are coming through there, it's really important that they look at you and they see a stability, steady as she goes. We hold the line. The country will come back to respecting each other, to friendliness toward each other. Part of it is just due to the example of our military, the most diverse workforce in the country, and the one that appears to be the most admired workforce in the country. Could that be an accident? I don't think so. The fact is, we're the best in the world. We're not perfect. We've got a lot of things we have to improve. But as a World War II Marine put it, a country didn't have to be perfect to be worth fighting for. Every year, every generation, America gets better. Once in a while, we have ups and downs, but the overall trajectory is in the right direction. So for the young folks who come through, who may be questioning, well, how much do people really believe in us? How much do they share our values? Maybe not all together right now, but when you look at what is the most admired institution in the country, and let me just tick off some that it's not. It's not the corporations, it's not the banks, it's not the Congress, not even the Supreme Court. And by the way, when I was your age, the Supreme Court was number one, often. It isn't anymore. No, first and far out in front of anyone who follows is the US military. So one of the most important things is that you stay active in shaping the values of the people you have coming through. If you're not talking to them about values in every class you have, over their iPhone, over the internet, over people out in town, there are other people who are going to fill that vacuum. And you should never assume the DI did it and now we don't have to do it anymore. You have to continue to put your thumbprint on them. I would also tell you that one of the reasons I find that I live in Silicon Valley when Stanford University is open, right on Sand Hill Road, right in the heart of Silicon Valley. I teach at Stanford, I teach at Berkeley, Dartmouth, Harvard, Colorado State, Utah State, USC, UCLA, Arizona State. I go all over the place. And one of the points I would make that separates the military and especially the naval service from the rest of the country is our willingness to put authority in the hands of younger and younger people. It's never perfect. I remember years ago reading a great big argument going on in the Gazette, in its letters, the Marine Corps Gazette, that somehow the fire team leaders aren't getting enough authority from the squad leaders. And colonels in the Marine Corps were arguing about this. Only in the Marine Corps could you find people concerned that lance corporals, corporals, and sergeants were not being given the authority they needed. I mean, you'll never see that. I guarantee you, I've been around a lot of corporations. I lecture all over the place. I'm on college campuses. Believe me, there's no argument about giving authority to 19, 20, 21-year-olds in those organizations. The thought does not even exist. So whatever you can do to emphasize the two qualities we need most when we promote petty officers and NCOs, when we promote young junior officers on up, the two qualities we need most are initiative and aggressiveness. And once in a while, my fine young Marines, someone is going to break your pea-picking heart. They're going to make a mistake or they're going to show a lack of discipline. But the answer is not to pull the authority back up. The answer is to increase your coaching. I finally realized by the time I reached the high rank of first lieutenant that the troops really didn't lay awake at night looking at the ceiling thinking, how can I screw up Lieutenant Mattis's day tomorrow? They really didn't do that. I wondered sometimes, because of the number of times my rambunctious young infantry guys had my heels locked in front of my commanding officer for some of their antics, but they really are out to do their very best. What I find often is that we don't understand the difference between a mistake and a lack of discipline. Now, generally speaking, I found that if the troops were making mistakes, the best solution was for me to adjust how I presented my expectations, how did I coach them, how did I give them my intentions. And then I would back out of it again, and suddenly I would see this rather tremendous performance by them. Well, that was interesting. If I raised my coaching just a little bit, suddenly they raised their results a whole lot. So guess who is really at fault when mistakes were being made? Maybe I didn't have the right supervision out there. Maybe I hadn't explained my intent, but I could look in the mirror for the problem. Now, if it's a lack of discipline, then you got to hold them accountable. And the more senior, the harsher you are. But for young people, again, some of the accountability may be nothing more than a good ass chewing. When I was a lieutenant, I'd take people on a 5-mile run, and after 3 miles, I'd start counseling them. They were a lot more willing to listen to me at that point. It was in private, don't humiliate them, that sort of thing. But here's the problem I see nowadays. I see people who make mistakes being dealt with very harshly, even to the point of NJP at times, and then, or being put up for court-martial, or people who have a lack of self-discipline and suddenly being excused for it. And I think one of the most important things you can explain to your Marines is the difference between a mistake and a lack of discipline. Like if you find a unit with a lot of DUIs, drug abuse, sexual harassment, I will show you a unit that in combat will have poor fire discipline, probably sloppy individual soldiering, and that sort of thing. You can't turn on and off a disciplined lifestyle. And in the naval service, if you run the ship on the rocks and you're senior, yeah, you're going to held to account whether it was a felony dumb mistake or it was a lack of discipline. But for all ranks, the idea should be, if you show discipline and you're using your initiative and aggressiveness to try to carry out to the best of your ability what your commander wants done, your NCO wants done, if it doesn't work out, you don't get hammered for it. I had some people, a very popular young Marine was killed in an IED strike, another man wounded, and they went up and they were under fire. They did some things, and I come into that the command of that unit, 1 MEF, Marcent, and already a congressman has called these Marines cold-blooded murderers in public press and all. Well, I spent nearly 7 months every weekend, every night, reading through 9,000 pages of investigation, 9,000 pages. And I could see that under the pressures they were under fire, they had done the best they could. So I dismissed the charges on several of those Marines, just dismissed them, said, nope, you're not going to be charged. And suddenly I get a phone call from a congressman's office who they say he wants to see me. I said, sure, I'll be on the next plane to Washington. And by the way, I read 9,000 pages. I'm sure the congressman did. We'll have a darn good discussion. Needless to say, a half hour later, his staff called back, said they didn't want to see me. I said, oh, but I insist. I need to come explain it. And they said, no, please don't. I said, well, please, I'd like to come. And they said, we will not let you in if you come. I said, okay, just remember this, you know? In other words, when you're the senior person, make sure that when your troops make a mistake, you protect them. I had a major come out to Stanford a couple of years ago before I was Secretary of Defense. I was working there then too when I got out of the Marines. And he was at Fort Leavenworth, and he was doing his thesis on me. And he said, are you aware you got in trouble at every rank except one? You know, you got either a letter of caution, a letter of censure, you got chewed out, you got a fitness report that rated you average in leadership and stuff at every rank except one. Boy, I said, I'm irritated. I don't know how I missed one, you know? But the point I'm making is what the Marine Corps did, you're going to hear the Marines are a no mistakes outfit. That isn't true. The only people who say that are people who either lack discipline, and yeah, the Marine Corps will drop kick your ass to the goalposts of life if you lack discipline. But they're the timid ones who don't want to do anything. And so they tell people, oh, you'll get in a lot of trouble if you do something, which is untrue. The Marine Corps saw every mistake I made and promoted me, knowing that I was learning what right looks like. And some of them are real bloopers. I managed to get my battalion surrounded in an open desert in the middle of a fight. Now that's almost impossible. And my regimental commander, seeing me later that day during an orders brief, as I turned to go back to my battalion, he called me over and he said, Jim, you learn anything today? I mean, he could have watched the whole thing through his binoculars in that open desert. I said, yes, sir, I did. And Colonel Fulford said, good, turned around and walked away. He didn't jump all over me about it. He knew I'd made a mistake. He just knew I'd learned something from it. So create an environment where people can use initiative and aggressiveness and coach them, and then coach them some more and coach them every day. My view of the best kind of leader, the model that I adopted that worked for me, and we all have to coach in our own way, mine was a player coach. I was in the infantry. I wanted to make sure I knew how to use the machine gun. I wanted to be as physically fit as the toughest guy in the unit. I wanted to make certain I knew how to call in air support and artillery support. But then I wanted to coach others to do it. And that was the model I adopted. And the method I used to employ for it was one, again, that I copied from the Marine Corps reading list, one used by George Washington. How did he take an army of free men? And by the way, for those of you who study history, and especially in this Black Lives Matter time right now, the French officers who were drawn up opposite our Revolutionary Army at Yorktown to accept the surrender of the British, by the way, at the battle that actually gave us a country. At that battle, when it was over and the British troops were marching out to surrender their weapons, the French officers looked across at these guys and said, many of the troops were nearly half naked. Their uniforms were in such tatters. 20% were using, in the French word, mulatto. That means black, ladies and gentlemen. That means 20% of the Revolutionary Army that was fighting there, that gave us this country, was black. Now, we were born with a birth defect, but here was George Washington with a Revolutionary Army, and he humbles the British redcoats who would defeat Napoleon a few years later, with French help, granted. And what was his leadership style? What was his method for practicing the leadership that he had? And it was very simple. It was actually boring. He would listen, and he would listen with the willingness to be persuaded, not just listen to somebody and say, fine, thank you, now go on and do what I told you in the first place. He actually listened, willing to listen to other people, and he would learn from them. He would learn from them. I would tell the U.S. officers at U.S. Central Command, I had 250,000 troops under my command, 200,000 American soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, Marines, 50,000 Allied troops trusted to us. We had 77 nations on my staff. And I used to tell the American officers, not all the good ideas come from the country with the most aircraft carriers. So listen and learn. So here's George Washington with all these free guys, and their idea is, just like our free young men and women who join today, is we're free. But he has to convince them, if you're not disciplined, that British Army is going to kick your ass, you're going to lose, and you're probably going to die in the process. So he would listen and learn from everyone. And he would meld together guys from South Carolina who couldn't even understand those people from Boston who talked so funny. The Delaware watermen, who were so free and ran their own fishing fleets and all, had to fall underneath the Virginia grandees who thought they were above everybody else. And somehow he puts that army together, and he would go out and he would listen to them, he would learn from them, so they felt respected, a word that needs to be emphasized in leadership today in America. And then he would help them. Listen and learn, show respect, and then help them. And at that point, he would lead. Boring, and he does it time after time as new provincial state militias join up, as some of his officers are almost ready to mutiny. He would listen, he would learn, he would help, and then he would lead. And he led as a player coach. He would go right into the point of the worst fighting at Monmouth Courthouse, and he would step right into those positions. And I'm reminded, you can see this photo back here, you can't see the picture of what it's about on my wall, I keep it there. There are 29 sailors and Marines there. When I was a 2-star, these were the lads who drove me all over in terrible Al-Anbar in 2004, where we were outnumbered, our casualties were daily. Give you an example, in one infantry company, 60 killed and wounded in a matter of 4 months out of 160, holding Ramadi. You've heard the word Fallujah. And out of those 29 sailors and Marines, 17 would be killed or wounded around me in 4 months. And I was a general, I wasn't even in the rough fighting. So it was a tough time. And I've always looked at what is the word that separates out why some units just move so smoothly and swiftly against the enemy. Why were some platoons worth 2 platoons to me in a fight? The fact is they had a lot of initiative and aggressiveness, and they got rewarded for it. But there was also an affection for one another, often put forward in rather humorous terms. There was an affection that they would do anything other than let each other down. I'll give you an example. Of those 29, all my officers, all my lieutenants who had been aged were getting hit. And so I had a gunnery sergeant for an aide who commanded the det finally, a real sharp communicator, tougher than petrified woodpecker lips. Every time we were getting ready to go out, it could be 120 degrees. He'd put them through rehearsals. Every day he'd do that. And I remember one time we had a guy real painfully wounded, wasn't badly wounded, but painfully wounded from fragments all over him. He was a white kid, but he was all chalky white. You all know what that means. And we had to fight for a while, and the gunny comes walking up, and he looks at the guy laying on the stretcher and says, "God, McDonald, you sure screwed up your health record this time." And you could just see that the toughest guy in the unit was their coach. He was the guy that they could always turn to. He was unrelenting in standards, but he had a sense of humor and he knew when to employ it. And he actually created affection, not popularity, with all the favoritism and negatives of popularity. He never surrendered 1 ounce of his authority. But there was a degree of humanity in him that rewarded their initiative and aggressiveness, that trusted him, and frankly, that believed so much in those young men that they believed in themselves, those sailors and Marines. So I throw that out to you because as I look at the schools that you run, I just looked at what your responsibilities were a couple days ago getting ready for this. These are oftentimes young folks who are debted out. And that small debt, it may be a corporal or a sergeant, it may even be a lance corporal who's in charge of the 2 guys who show up with the refueler truck at midnight to refuel people. And there's no telling how low the leadership might be that is relevant. But whatever you can plug into these folks that creates that sort of bond between Marines, I think you really have to look at how do you employ your own leadership to put that into your folks. Colonel Scano, I think I'll stop there because I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I'm going to do this until you're done.
General, I'll ask the first question. The situation in China continues to escalate in many different ways. In your opinion, General, how does this look like 5 years, 10 years from now? What is the trigger point, in your opinion, with a war or a regional conflict in the Pacific?
When I came in to the SecDef job, I'd spent most of my time since 9/11, a lot of my time since 1979 in the Middle East. I had to broaden things a lot, and I found we did not have a strategy. We immediately, the first night I was there, by the way, I got out a yellow pad of paper and started writing what became the National Defense Strategy. And you see in that goes to the heart of your question about China. I think in terms of the terrorist threat, it's an ambient threat. We'll still have Marines fighting terrorists throughout however long your careers are. North Korea is the most urgent threat we have. In terms of just raw power, it would be Russia right now because of their nuclear weapons. But in terms of will, it's China. And if you look at China, if you had asked me this question even 3-4 months ago, I would have told you that China is a long-term threat, that they are moving mostly in gray areas, and they're trying to set up a situation where they're the regional hegemon. Today, I'm not so sure they're a long-term threat. I think they may even be a near-term to mid-term concern. And I say this because things were going pretty well for China. They were stealing everybody's intellectual property, which was putting their economy out in front. They had taken over the islands pretty much by the time this administration came in the South China Sea. They had infiltrated universities all around the world, including in America. They had infiltrated the Australian Parliament and the Australian journalists down there, their press people. And then they even, something shifted after COVID, which they did not handle well. And what they did was they began what was called wolf diplomacy. basically in your face, you will do as we tell you. What they want, ladies and gentlemen, if you study classical China, which I used to do as a hobby when I was a young guy, it's like the Qing dynasty, and they want tribute states around them, and you pay homage to the tribute state. You pay tribute. It goes back to classical China 2,000 years ago. Very consistent with their culture. But now what they've been doing between attacking Indian troops on the frontier, taking over Hong Kong, which was, they promised us, by the way, if we supported them, which we did on the return of Hong Kong from Britain to China, it'd be one country, two systems. They lied to us, and they've now removed any doubt with the National Security Act. They're locking up people because they're Muslims. And I'm not talking about a few. I'm not talking about 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. I'm talking millions. They have locked up and put in re-education camps. They are oppressive, authoritarian. I can go on. I can go on and on. And they have managed to, with this aggressive stance recently, to turn off a lot of people. So why are they doing this? I don't know. I don't know what is the vulnerability that President Xi sees. But the question is, why have they changed in the last 4, 5, 6 months to this wolf diplomacy? And I don't have the answer right now. I can't really answer your question because they have enormous environmental problems. They have a very unhappy people. Frankly, they've got a lot of internal riots and violent skirmishes every day as people are angry. I don't know what is the urgency to this, but I think that the most important thing we can do, and I'll give you 3 words for it: allies, allies, allies. If you look at Vietnam that flanks the South China Sea, if you look at the islands there, where if we, in the event of hostilities, we could land Marines across all those islands and bring out the manhood in all of those countries there that they've got us to stand by them, we could keep any conflict to a war at sea, is my point. And if the Chinese fleet sorties through those islands, the way the Commandant is changing the Marine Corps, the Marines can help the Pacific Fleet defeat them, and that fleet that sails out will not return to port. And that would be the way we keep some degree of balance. Kind of a long answer, but I don't have a good answer for you right now because I don't know what changed that caused this kind of this wolf diplomacy that there's ongoing right now. There's a cyber and economic war against Australia by China. I mean, there is something really bad going on. And you Marines, you've got to be turning out people who are ready to fight, is the bottom line, so that our diplomats always speak from a position of authority. That's the best answer I can give you, Colonel.
Thank you, General. Next question.
Sir, Major Oliver here. Thank you for this opportunity. The question I have, sir, we have a lot of instructors across 11 different schools, as you alluded to. The challenge I have as a commander is keeping them being motivated and teaching themselves. What advice could you give us, give me, to make sure that my leaders remain teachable and grow and remain teachable, sir?
I would make sure of is that that you have some kind of lessons learned thing. And if you keep your instructors at the top of their game, physically fit, just the kind of guys, I mean, I know mostly guys because of my infantry time, but the kind of guys and gals I think who join the Marines, they admire people who are physically as tough or tougher than they are. And if someone is not tougher than they are, there's a little bit of moral authority that slides off. And no instructor is going to enjoy being in a position where their troops look at them in a calculating way. There should be only one way they look at them, and that's with awe, you know, is the bottom line. So physically at the top of their game, but mentally make sure that you're sitting in on each other's classes and critiquing each other, because that will keep you from becoming, hold on, man, I gotta let my dog out. she's a very insistent dog. But you've got to have, you cannot get complacent and think your coaching skill is what it should be. Another thing is to read about things that expand the way you look at leadership. There's a book out called Entrepreneurial Leadership. Entrepreneurial Leadership. And because I was always interested, why did Silicon Valley have such an outsized sort of impact on our country, on the world? And if you read Entrepreneurial Leadership, and if you read $1 Trillion Coach, those two books, now I confess I've had some input to them, okay, but it doesn't show up anywhere. Those two books will show you why this little valley with one university has impacted all of humanity, for better or worse, I might add. But what this does, it expands your view of your role. You know, there's a former Marine who wrote a book called The Legend of Bagger Vance, where he uses golf as an analogy for life. And Stephen Pressfield writes in there that everybody has to maintain their own authentic swing. In other words, if you're a gal whose view of problem solving is one where you really bear down on the problem definition, don't try to be someone who then shifts and says, oh, I want to work just on solutions. Stick with what you've got. Build on what you've got. If you're a guy whose view of leadership is leadership by example, build on that, is my point. But books like this will allow you to pull the cadre together and to sense that you're a stronger unit together helping each other than you are alone. Does that answer your question, Major?
It does, sir. Thank you very much.
Sure. Another question.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Major Doug Mayorga. I will say that a pretty big fan. I actually served in New York, a couple of commands, Task Force 58, #1, and also during the original invasion of Iraq. So those were pretty proud moments individually and as an American. I want to echo a little bit on the previous question. A couple of the bullets that I pull out from you in the multiple speeches was #1, brilliance in the basics. I know you lived that. I know you coached that. I know you pumped all your Marines with that one single line, brilliance in the basics, doing your job and doing it well. What can you impart to this group where our main job is to train those basic Marines to that basic skill set throughout your career?
The brilliance in the basics concept I got from a fellow battalion commander. It was during a time we were stationed down in Central America some years ago. Some of you can read about what we did down there. But he asked me about how I'd seen Marines injured or killed, training or combat. And I thought about it that night. And the next day I said, you know, I think about a third of them. And just be careful where you use this example, folks, because it's tough. I'm out with Gold Star parents tomorrow, so you understand why I'm cautioning you here. A third of them were killed for silly, stupid, frickin' reasons. I'll never forget the lad who I was on the radio. I looked over, saw his squad leader point to him, point to move. And I whipped back around when I realized what he was going to do, and it was too late. He'd gotten up and run right in front of the machine gun that was giving him covering fire. I'd seen where his eyes went as he rightly picked out his next position. If you keep emphasizing the basics from the MOS training you do, but also don't let them get so caught up in it, they forget that they're really there to be fighters. First and last, they're fighting. Throw something into I'll give you an example. Somalia, 1990, 91, late 91. water point Marines, water purification Marines running a water point on the coast there. And they're getting relieved by the Army. And the Army came up, the water purification guys, and said, well, where's your security? And the water point Marines picked up their M16s and said, right there. They had to bring in a platoon of infantry to secure the water point because their water point guys had become so Union card thinking that they only do water, they don't do fighting. And you see the tragedy of that when that Army convoy in the invasion of Iraq, you remember what happened when the resupply convoy turned into An-Nazariya and got shot up, killed, wounded, taken prisoner. I would just tell you that somehow you have got to make sure that the basics include MOS, but every Marine a rifleman, every Marine alert and cunning to their environment. And I think the way you do it is occasionally introducing something unexpected. It can be of what happens when, for example, during the invasion of Kuwait, when I got my battalion surrounded, the combat trains with mechanics, cooks, Navy corpsmen, refueling guys, they had to fight armored vehicles in the rear of my battalion. So I sent a reserve rifle company back to help them. We were fully committed up front. And the grunts came back laughing and shaking their heads. They said by the time we got there, they'd killed all the enemy, taken out 3 armored vehicles. I mean, the lieutenants and lance corporals did their job. And then I remembered that the logistics officer there every 3rd day put all the logistics troops through fire and movement training. All of them were doing that. So for you all to suddenly throw something in at the end of the training day, say, by the way, we're going out and we're going to practice fire and movement, you know, something like that. Do something that reminds them what it is they're all about so that they do not get to a position where brilliance in the basics is what that Army water point unit thought their basics were. They only do water. No, no, no. Marines fight. It's just a matter of how they fight and what else they do too. I'm reminded of the Marine fighter pilot briefing the new Secretary of Defense in 2000, a guy named Rumsfeld, early 2001, right after the election. And Rumsfeld said, I like your style there, Marine. You wear wings. What's your job in the Marines? And the lieutenant colonel said, well, Mr. Secretary, I'm a rifleman. Right now I fly F-18s. You see what I'm driving at? He didn't allow his MOS to get rid of the fact that he was just another Marine ready to fight. And that's, I think, the attitude, the brilliance in the basics has got to come down to being done over and over again. For one thing, it'll remove complacency. You do not get complacent when you go through hard training. When you go through hard training, you're always reminded you can do better. And the lessons learned, the after action really helps bring that out. So that's kind of how I would look at it. I don't know if that applies to your circumstance, but that's the way I would try to apply what I've learned over the years.
Good afternoon, sir. Staff Sergeant Coots. My question is, with the growing threat in the Pacific, do you see the value in the Marine Corps coming up with a doctrine or a formal school in training subterranean warfare? Because historically, we've had a more difficult time fighting underground, such as caves and tunnels. Yeah,
I'm not sure on that one. It's a good question. I know before we went back into Iraq, when the ships were still bringing our gear home, the invasion was over. And it was, I remember it was November 10th, I think. It was the Marine Corps birthday of 2003 when I got the word. I watched the press conference and I heard 1st Marine Division would get no warning order, stand by to return to Iraq and relieve the 82nd Airborne in that place called Al Anbar. And so we went up to Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles police talked to us about how you work with the local barrio priests. We're thinking about the clerics and the mosques, how you work with engineers to get water going again, how you police minority communities. We had Sunni and Shia, you know, that we had to sort out their 600 years of hatred of each other, that sort of thing. And they showed us the underground city in Los Angeles. And, you know, in some ways, there could be a value in that, but I think it would be of small teams to be trained for it, not large units. I think by and large, most human beings have got to come out of those subterranean areas to live. So the better way would be to isolate. And if you think about it in terms of ISIS, when I came in, we were fighting ISIS when I was SecDef. And after talking to my European counterparts who were scared of those guys getting those foreign fighters returning to Europe, I slowed the operation down operationally and said, I want you to take your time and encircle the enemy strong points. Don't just push against them so they get out, fall back, and reinforce the next one. It's going to keep getting harder. It's like a snowball. You're going to make it harder and harder. So I want you to take your time and surround Western, you know, Mosul, surround Tal Afar, surround Raqqa, surround Tabqa, surround each one, and instead of attrition tactics, fight annihilation tactics. I think when the enemy goes underground, we may want to fight annihilation tactics and seal the entrances. Some teams may have to go in for reasons of charting where the enemy's at underground, but I think it may be better to seal them off and kill them that way, because that could be very, very labor intensive, and more than likely, no matter what technologies we come up with in this world, the adversary will have them too, and it will be very, very costly in terms of our lads who go up against them. So I'd be more inclined to isolate and annihilate and go in and fight the attrition war underground. But yeah, if you think I'm wrong, this is not something that I'm current on right now. That's where my thinking was a couple of years ago. If you think I'm wrong, please come back and educate me here.
Oh, no, sir, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, sure. What else on your mind?
Good afternoon, sir. First, I'd like to say thank you for your service. My name is Sark Khan, and I'd like to ask you a question regarding to your book, Learning to Lead. In Chapter 11, you spoke of press integrity. Do you feel that press integrity has any impact to the Marines while they're forward deployed? And have you seen any of the press integrity from that moment and incidents after Haditha to your position as Secretary of Defense change for the better, or do you think it still remains the same?
And this is on integrity. Is that what your question's about?
Yeah, yes, sir. Press integrity.
Say again.
My question is, do you feel that press integrity has an impact to the morale and effectiveness of Marines that are forward deployed?
Well, in terms of again, there's a real echo in the room. So if I get this wrong, just wave your hand and interrupt me. I think that any time a leader's integrity is not accepted by their subordinates, that you have a much weaker force. I would love to fight an enemy whose troops did not believe in their general's word, did not believe, because it'd be so much easier to kill them. That they would be more brittle, they'd be less aggressive, they'd be less bold. If people don't trust their leader, go ahead.
So the question is not regarding really the leaders in the Marine Corps, but the civilian world, as far as the press. When, for example, when they were speaking about the Marines in Haditha who were like forward deployed before then or after, do you feel that the press integrity ruins the overall morale and effectiveness of the Marines that are forward deployed?
I got it. Hey, thank you. Great question. It was a lot clearer as you came up closer there too. Thank you. I don't think it hurt the morale of the Marines so long as they knew their NCOs, their company commanders, their battalion commanders, their generals stuck with them. I bring this up because I'm talking to a lot of police departments today that feel a great deal of pressure. And yet they don't have a lack of morale amongst each other. It's because it's what they do. Their professionalism is so ingrained in them that they're keeping the faith. I think that what that does is it makes it harder, for example, for our recruiting force, who have got to overcome that sort of thing, that sort of stuff. But here's the thing. Somehow, in the midst of two very poorly explained and inconclusive wars, the military continues to be far and away more admired and respected than even the ministry, doctors, lawyers, all these other professions. They're more highly thought of than the teachers or the professors, certainly more highly thought of than the politicians or people like that. And so somehow the American people have not been swayed by this. If there's a concern I have, it's if our troops start doubting themselves, if they are not well led, then that could erode their self-image. And that would be the bad point. But the biggest concern in that regard is the sense of victimhood or cynicism. I always considered those two. I always considered cynicism, which is, well, you can't do anything about it anyway, so who gives a damn, it sucks and then it gets worse. I considered that cowardice. You can always do something. Secondly, victimhood. Now, in America today, it's great to be a victim. I was trying to figure out how I could be a victim. I've come up with all sorts of things. I could be on CNN for 15 minutes every day and get all sorts of people loving me if I said I'm a victim for something. But the fact is, Marines are not victims. They're not cynics. When you have a force that's designed to land on hostile shores, it's going to be pretty darn tough. And there's nothing the Marines went through at Guadalcanal or Incheon, Tarawa, or Quai Son that can be so tough that we can't go through any challenge that comes our way. So unless we go inward and allow things like that to erode our integrity, our trust, our teamwork, unless we have people who start sucking their thumb, and that starts with a leader, because how a leader goes is the way their troops go. Your power of expectation, if you say your guys and gals have got what it takes, they'll believe you. That's just the natural way of Marine leadership. So long as we don't allow victimhood and cynicism to get anchored inside our core, then I don't think it'll have any impact whatsoever. Because, why? It's just like the police. It's what we do. We can withstand anything. And at the end of the day, everyone knows if the window breaks in their house at 2 a.m., they're going to reach for the phone and call the police, okay? And everyone knows that if the Marines land, the situation will be well in hand. Now, we're not perfect. Remember, even Jesus of Nazareth had 1 out of 12 go to crap on him, okay? So no selection system is perfect. You're going to have a few things go wrong in your organization. But you must always be defined by the tough guys and gals who are so physically fit, who are so mentally sharp, who believe in their troops so much that the troops have no choice but to believe in themselves. That's the best answer I can give you, but it's a complex question. And if you think I missed here, come back at me now. Go ahead and do a follow-up if you think that it's not quite on track.
No, sir, that answered it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. These are very good questions you're coming up with here. Thank you. What else on your minds?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Lieutenant Ammon. I'm the supply officer and S4 officer here. So we've touched on it a little bit, but in the society that exhausts itself on being individualistic, what guidance do you have for the new Marines that our instructors teach on how to ensure that they keep the faith that you talked about in call sign chaos?
Yeah. Well, that's a good one. You know, I come from the American West, and individualism is highly celebrated out here. But I've always found that Americans of every generation, I don't see the millennials any different in this regard. If anything, I think they are fleeing in many cases some of the values-free college campuses, towns that they've grown up in. So by and large, what the recruiters are bringing you today, I will just tell you, is a higher degree of acceptance of the Marine Corps values than perhaps when I came in 1969, when, like myself, many of us were motivated by the draft. I think as I look at the individualism, the point to make is in all your training, just build teams in everything. In every example, I'm sure you've got some attention gainer at the beginning of each class. Give an example always of teamwork so that you build a mental model in these people's minds, because I wanted the individual aggressive nature of my gunny who ran my command post, my 29 sailors and Marines. But it had to be, his individualism had to come out in a way that showed he cared so much for those sailors and Marines. And we were going to do the mission come hell or high water, and the team would stick together. There was never the opportunity to see yourself other than in the team. Now remember, these folks have all come through the crucible. They've had a lot of shaping and forming. So you are building on something because of that wonderful Marine boot camp that still is not understood by anyone outside the Marine Corps. And so if what you do is you reward teamwork constantly, then you'll get teamwork. But an institution gets the behavior it rewards. When there's individual acts of heroism, of course we recognize that. And yet most of the time, you know, the only reason I stuck around this low paying outfit for 40 years was not because I love minefields. I learned to hate them at age 21. I was overseas as a second lieutenant with my all of 3 years of college by the time I was 21. But I was just amazed and fell in love with sailors and Marines who would do whatever it took to take care of their buddy. And that was why I stuck around. So I'll tell you, I mean, I'm at Stanford University most of the time. I hear it's a good school, you know, like top in the world, according to some people. I'd say about 70% of them, I wouldn't want in the fighting hole next to me. And they're not bad people. It just shows what you and I have come to expect from our recruiters and DIs that show up at Fort Lee. And celebrate the skills and everything they bring individually. I mean, we want a diverse workforce. We want people who feel, some cases, feel very individualistic. We need that. It'd be a pretty bad orchestra if all you had was violin players. We need diversity coming in the Marine Corps. We need people who think like that. And there are many, you're right. But we also on the battlefield need e pluribus unum, out of many one, everyone pulling together. And that's why those little words are written on every coin we have in this diverse society, e pluribus unum. And just keep rewarding every time somebody does something. I remember I was on a basketball team long ago. Matter of fact, it was in the last millennium. I'm old as dirt. And I remember the coach pulling a guy out during a huddle and talking to him and saying, you had an easy shot and so did so-and-so, and you passed the ball over to him so he could make the layup. You know, it was a fast break. We had the shot. It's just who was going to take it. And he actually, and we all looked at that guy like, man, the coach, he's a tough guy. He's a World War II Army soldier, fought in the Battle of the Bulge. Mr. Harvey, I still remember him, but he was personally congratulating someone for passing the ball to someone else to make the easy shot. I think so long as you continue to congratulate people every time they do something minor or major for the team, you'll get the behavior you reward. And those individuals bring all that individual strength in for the good of the team. I'd build on it, I guess is my point. Build on it. Don't try to remove it, build on it. That answer your question?
That's where it did. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Captain Mario Ariano. I'm the executive officer here with Bravo Company. So in my time, working with Marines and being around Marines, I've always been a big advocate for Devil Dogs wanting to re-enlist and stay in the Marine Corps. Because it's a good outfit and it offers a lot of opportunity. But you always hear they always want to go back to Kentucky or Ohio, work for their uncle or something, and they all want to go to college, or they have a plan on going to college. So I just wanted to see kind of what do you see out there for veterans that are going to these colleges? You say you teach at a lot of colleges, sir. What do you see them doing, kind of the mistakes they made, or maybe how can we better prepare our Marines for that next step that they all say they want to go to college? What do they need to do to prepare for that?
You mean to encourage them to go to college, to take the jump at it?
All right, I'm sorry. So I'll just say, what can Marines do to better prepare themselves to exit the Marine Corps and go to college?
Well, I think the most important thing on the college piece of it is just make sure that they develop the discipline. I'll give you an example of my older brother went into the Marines during Vietnam, and he had a 1.1 grade point in college, his 1 year of college before I went in the Marines. He returns from Vietnam and goes to college, and he has a 4.0. Now, he didn't get that much smarter in Vietnam, okay? What he got was Marine Corps training, okay? He got Marine Corps discipline, and he turned around. I mean, he's better educated than I am. He's got more years of college than I have by a darn sight, double. And so I think the most important thing is to create these habits of discipline that allows someone to say, I'm going to forego going partying. I'm going to forego doing this. I got to study tonight. And the Marine Corps attributes of self-discipline, of confidence, self-confidence that grows from being physically at the top of your game, mentally sharp, that's right, doing the commandant's reading list. But most of all, I always thought that the Marines' primary weapon system was their spirit. I'd seen so many times when the chips were down and my guys got me out of every jam I got them into, and there was just something about them that couldn't be deflected, couldn't be stopped. And I think the worst thing is if they get out of the Marines and they don't keep those attributes, they don't keep being Marines in ways that they know they could be and stay at the top of their game. But I think while they're in, if you just, for example, I remember I had a regimental commander and he used to make us all come in and report on one book a month at officers' school, 1 book a month from the commandant's reading list. We had the leader discussion in it. And the idea was to make sure others were reading the book too and encourage them to read it. And I think that it really comes down to your imagination, how you build the Marines for this. There's a lot of ways, but one thing I will tell you, I spent a lot of time around Ivy League schools. They're called that because they're supposed to be the best schools in America. I lecture at Harvard and Dartmouth and stuff like that. I got 3 years of college, but I got Marine infantry. I got a PhD in walking from the Marine infantry, okay? So I consider myself quite adequate to talking to these folks because I got the discipline to be up on anything. Plus, I practice my method of leadership: listen, learn, help, lead. and it works like a champ. I will tell you this right now, there is not a subject in college that every one of the Marines you're putting through that school could not master if they sat down and studied it. It just isn't that hard. You know, the big secret about Ivy League schools, I'm going to share something with you. They're hard as hell to get into. They're darn near impossible to flunk out of, okay? So believe me, your Marines can do it. Former Marine Captain Jim Wright went off to be the president, and he's now the president emeritus, means he's the old man who used to be president, but everyone still loves him, of Dartmouth University, Ivy League school. You know what he would do during all the war years we had, when we had a lot of wounded guys? He would go down to Bethesda Marine, and he'd find just grievously wounded Marines laying in those beds. You know what I'm talking about. Mostly lance corporals through sergeants, few officers. And he would ask those lance corporals, you ever thought about going to Dartmouth? Lance corporal, I said, what's Dartmouth? And he said, well, that's where you're going to go to college. And you won't believe the number of Marines who've gone through Dartmouth on free ride scholarships. He didn't ask them what their SAT score was. He didn't ask them what their law school score was. He didn't ask them what their ASVAB score was. He knew they were Marines. He knew they could do it. So just make sure you build the confidence in your people and do it the way Confucius recommended: body, mind, and spirit. And remember, the spirit's the primary weapon system. What other questions you got?
Good morning, sir. Sergeant Ellis Reyes. I had a question, since we're all instructors here and we get newly joined Marines straight from boot camp and MCT. What they're feeling a lot is the repercussions from the COVID-19 that us senior leaders never really had to experience. In your opinion, did you ever have to experience something like this similar in your time as a Marine? And can you give any of them any advice on maybe something that you can help them grow with and take on to the fleet?
Yeah, good question. Nothing specifically like COVID-19, nothing even close to that. But I came in, let me put it this way. What your young people are learning right now, you tell them that these are not hard times or difficult times. These are stern times, but they are also times that teach us we don't control this world. The world will not comport itself in ways we want it to, least of all if you're in the naval service. And it's another Friday night, you're getting ready for a 3-day weekend, and all of a sudden the duty NCO comes through hammering on doors saying, get all your gear, get ready, we're deploying tomorrow. All of a sudden things go wrong. You're actually learning you have a great opportunity right now to explain to them two things. One, you must be prepared to take life shocks in stride. This is a learning opportunity. This is an opportunity to be better. And how do you be better? The second point I would make is you don't control anything in your life, not even if you're a general or secretary of defense, other than this, how you react to what happens to you. That's the only thing you control, is how you're going to react. I have seen people in the middle of fights when everyone wanted just to lay down, and a cunning lance corporal figures out he's got a 3-inch lip of dirt he can crawl along and get behind and shoot the enemy right in the back, and he does it. We can always find opportunities, options. Look at how you're sitting around the room right now, the spaces between you. And yet somehow your spirit's connecting you, and we're able to, from the Columbia Basin in Washington State to Fort Lee, have a talk about common values. And so many things are accepted by us that we don't even talk about them here because we know where each other stands. So I think what you should do is point out that they have a learning opportunity, that this is just a test to see if they're just Marines only on the outside or if they got it on the inside too. This is the opportunity to say, I can do it, I can handle it. I remember we're up in the Sierra Nevadas. It was well below freezing, probably about 10 or 15 degrees in the winter. and we were going up a snowy slope, and a young machine gunner in front of me, he fell. There was snow covering some ice, and obviously the snow and stuff got inside his snowsuit. He took a hard fall on the ice. He collected up the machine gun right away, blew all the snow and wiped all the snow and ice off it. He looked over his shoulder. I knew he had snow down inside his suit, and said, "Watch out for the ice," and kept right on going up the hill. Nothing big, just a lance corporal who was going to keep right on going. I remember another lance corporal. Lance corporal is my favorite rank. The last rank I think I made, honestly. And we were ordered after I'd said, "Do not attack Fallujah. I've got a way to handle this problem." I was ordered to attack Fallujah. I said, "Okay, don't stop me." Deep inside the city, I'm ordered to stop. My lads are in house to house fighting, and then I'm ordered to pull out. I tell you, the young guys who had fought, they'd had a rough go. They were filthy dirty. The enemy was running out of ammo. We were kicking in doors and taking 2 shots, and then the enemy was out of ammo, and we'd kill them all. And a cameraman stuffs a camera in the face of a kid, slow-talking, blonde-haired, tow-headed kid from down south, talk real slow. And he said, "Oh, you must feel horrible. Your commanders have ordered you to retreat. Marines don't retreat. You've lost your buddies. You must feel horrible that you're now giving up ground that you fought to take. And you must feel terrible. And what do you have to say, Marine?" And a Marine, he's a light machine gunner. He's got a machine gun over his shoulder, the saw over his shoulder, just kind of looks into the camera and says, "Doesn't matter. We'll hunt him down somewhere else and kill him." And he just walked off. My point is that nothing that we face is worse than Shiloh, is worse than Belleau Wood. Nothing. So use this as an example of how to build your character. How you deal with this means you're ready for your Guadalcanal. Do you suck your thumb and whine and say, "Oh, I got to sit on the couch tonight and wash my hands? Poor me"? Or do you say, "Screw it. I'm going to write a letter to my mom and show some respect. I'm going to study the Marine Corps, the Commandant's reading list"? I put myself on a requirement that I'm going to be able to do more pull-ups. I screwed up my shoulder a while back. I'm going to get back to 20 pull-ups during COVID. And so I'm working on 20 pull-ups again. Kind of irritated me that the Commandant's rated, I think, to 23 or some damn thing. So now I got to work even harder. But my point is, you never get into a position, allow your folks to hide. You know what your job is as leaders? Your number one job is define reality. Do not let your Marines suck their thumb and live in a mythological world, or deny the reality of COVID, deny the reality of China that was brought up here, deny the reality that you believe that you've got to prepare your young Marines for. And that real world, when they step across the LD, is a bloody, awful world. So you just keep using this as one more example of how to build your character, because eventually Marines will remember that guy just turned around. He didn't curse. He didn't say it's too cold. We shouldn't be on the mountainside. He just said, "Watch out for the ice," and kept right on going. That's what we got to bring out, folks. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sure. Good question. Thanks for bringing it up. It keeps us relevant here.
Good afternoon, sir. Stas Armordoni. I'm a small arms instructor here. The question I have for you is, what impact do you think the loss of tank battalions will have on future combat operations for the Marine Corps?
Yeah, future tank battalions and the loss of them. I've always liked tanks. I like big things that shoot big guns at bad guys. I've always believed in them. Believe it or not, I was in a tank unit for a couple of months before I got in trouble and got transferred to an artillery unit in the reserves. Like I told you, my getting in trouble started young. But let me put it this way. 15 years ago, there were things you could not do with wheeled vehicles you can do today. Tanks takes special, I'll give you an example. As a NATO officer, I was made a NATO Supreme Commander. I was flabbergasted that most of the bridges in Europe could not handle one of our main battle tanks, because main battle tanks had grown so heavy that the bridges, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall, they no longer strengthened them. And today, the tanks couldn't get to a lot of battlefields in Europe. I mean, I just assumed that, of course, you can do it, you know? So I don't know what the impact will be because none of us have a clear idea. I mean, I always tell people, when people talk about the foreseeable future, I say, no, it's not. None of us can foresee the future. But that said, when I look at what the Army's doing with their LAVs, with that 30mm gun on them, and I look at the mobility and the enormous mobility now of 6- and 8-wheeled LAVs, I'm wondering if we're not going to be, you notice the commandant's also adding another light armored vehicle battalion, even as he's reducing the 3 tank battalions, removing them, the 2 active and the 1 reserve. So I don't think right now that this is something that is going to cause us damage. It may be that we have more firepower in more places, but it's not as heavy. But when you look at the advances in rocketry, it may be the enemy's tanks are nothing more than the horse cavalry of the 1930s, which you know, tanks made short work of. We may be able to make short work of the enemy tanks too, because of the weapons carried by infantry and any armored Marines. So I don't have a good answer for you, but I think that we're probably in a position right now to make up for the loss of the heavy armor using electronic defenses of the light armored vehicles and the mobility of the light armored vehicles in a way that we could not have even a decade ago. Other questions?
Sir, again, thank you for your time. The question I have is for the young leaders in the room, because we have a lot of young sergeants and staff NCOs here. If there was one leadership lesson you wish you had learned early in your career that you learned in a ladder, what would that be, sir?
Yeah, there's probably 2, and one I alluded to already, but one of them would be when I was young, if there was something I thought was wrong, I'd sink my teeth into it, and I just stay on that issue. And as I grew older, I realized I needed to take a broader view. That oftentimes, number one, I wasn't right about what I thought was wrong, but also that if you took a broader view, you could see why certain decisions had been taken. And I wasted a lot of time at times being anti something instead of trying to look at it rationally and figure out how it fit into something bigger. The other point would be to remember, just again, the reason I stuck around the low paying outfit was the spirits of the sailors and Marines. And do whatever you can without mollycoddling them. We're not the Peace Corps, we're the Marine Corps. But make sure that you value their spirits and the idea that they had the guts to come into the Marine Corps as all volunteers at a time when how few of their peers out there could ever have qualified or wanted to do so. And get to know them so well that, you know, I wish I'd gotten to know them all better. I like being close to the Marines. I like being in the infantry because you're right there in the muck with them. But I think that if I'd known them even better, I could have been a better leader for them. And to spend the time getting to know them. I mean, it was important I learned how to call air support. It was important I spent time with officers, so I learned how to be a better officer. But my NCOs, I think at times they took almost too good a care of me in the infantry, where they were doing a lot of that, but maybe I wasn't as effective as I could have been without doing the NCO's job, just doing the officer's job, but reinforcing the NCOs more who are carrying the burden, the real burden, not only for the mission, but for teaching me how to be an officer. I should have been also spending more time with those troops. I get thanked a lot for my service, you know, because people think I'm important or something now. But I will just tell you that my service, as you know, my record was gained by people like you. That's not false modesty. That's just the reality. And so I think if I could have done anything differently, it'd be to put more effort, more social energy into the young sailors and Marines. Any other questions here? How about if I don't let you go unless you ask one more question? Boy, that'll put you on a spot, huh? Who's got the initiative and aggressiveness to get you your emancipation here today?
General, good morning. Staff Sergeant Sarvac. You have a famous point makes us stupid. Specifically in regards to our entry-level training, do you have any advice on how we can move more away from PowerPoint presentations when we're instructing our students?
Yeah. Yeah, PowerPoint, I had a friend, I'm from Washington State, so I have a friend who used to run Microsoft, Steve Ballmer, and I got quote on the front page of the New York Times saying PowerPoint makes you stupid. And he was coming to see me about a week later. He didn't appreciate my comment on PowerPoint. Here's the thing. I think PowerPoint works well when you're giving data, but I think it is horrible in terms of what it does with its so many bits of information. I don't care how many lightning bolts you put on it, or clouds, or exclamation points, or colors. The bottom line is, I think that PowerPoint is designed to display data and is very poor when you're trying to convey the Gettysburg Address, Commander's intent, the Lord's Prayer, or anything else. I think it's your force of personality. I remember going through courses where my instructors didn't have PowerPoint, and when I was young, because that was pre-computer age, but what they taught me still sits with me today because of the power of their force of personality. As they drove points home about time spent on reconnaissance is never wasted. Do your recon, young officers. They would drive the point home to us. They'd stomp their foot. They'd walk up and down the aisle. They'd do things like throw a baseball suddenly out and see who caught it or whose mind was drifting off. They had ways of keeping us focused there. And what they really doing, you know what they're doing? They were telling us, this is really important to me, and I want it to be important to you. That's what they were really doing as instructors. And how you keep that lifeblood flowing through your students. This is why you need to go into each other's classrooms and watch each other teaching things. This is why you need to read $1 Trillion Coach, so that you have ideas of how to keep things they don't get monotonous and that sort of thing. So I just work on finding the best ideas that don't involve a PowerPoint slide and emphasize those and keep the human element in there, because long after they leave Fort Lee, they'll remember the stories you told them about when you made a mistake and violated something you're teaching, or when you saw something work, or when teamwork pulled it out when everybody thought it couldn't be done. I mean, one of you was there at Task Force 58. Task Force 58 starts when an admiral, after 9/11, leans across, 3-star admiral, fleet commander, leans across a coffee table in his office, and he says to me, I'm a 1-star. He said, the enemy's going to lose Mazar-e Sharif and fall back on Kabul. Admiral had done his homework. He said, no one's held Kabul in 500 years. They're heading to Kandahar. Can you get the Marines from the Pacific Fleet and the Mediterranean Fleet together, land 350 nautical miles inside Afghanistan, move against Kandahar, and raise hell? That's the only order, by the way, he ever gave me. I said, yep, Admiral, I can do it. He said, okay, I'll give you a plane. You go do the reconnaissance and then tell me what you need and let's get on with it. And you know why I could do that? Because at the same time, Royal Marine Commando was out there. Elite mountain warfare troops from the United Kingdom. And they couldn't go. You know why? What made the difference for that? Marine Corps and Navy logistics is what gave me the ability to do that. Nobody else, not even the U.S. Army, could do what we could do in that case. And so what you want to do is use examples like that to let people know, here's what you're doing. You're part of the deepest reaching force in history. This is the naval force going 350 nautical miles inland. What enemy can hide from America when we have sailors and Marines that can do that? And the only reason we could do it and the elite Royal Marines could not, logistics. That was what made the difference. We both had troops, their infantry guys, ours, who could close with and had the skill and ferocity in close quarters fighting to kill every enemy there. My only worry was not whether or not we'd win, was how many of my boys would I lose. But the logistics is what unleashed our effort against them when no other country could have done it. So you remember that and keep bringing up examples of what Marine and Navy logistics do and how they fit into it. And it raises their understanding. I'll leave it there. I know you guys got work to do and I got to let it go. But it's an honor to be with you all today and keep putting your thumbprint on them there.
General, on behalf of the command here at Marine Detachment Fort Lee, thank you for your time, and we'll shut it off there. Thank you, General.
Okay, thank you. So long, Marines. Semper Fi.